Hello. Have you ever thought about taking a sabbatical, but then you immediately thought, well, that's not a smart financial decision? Well, then you're going to want to stick around for my conversation with Jessica Merino, who is my financial planner, and she helped my husband and I plan financially to take a whole year-long sabbatical where we traveled to all 7 continents without negatively impacting our long-term finances and even some of the bigger short-term goals that we had. So before we get into intros, I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. So comment below so to let us know that you're watching, even if you're catching the replay. Still want to know that you're joining us for this conversation. We're so excited that you are listening with us. So Jessica, I'd love to hear for you to share a bit more about yourself personally, professionally, so everybody knows a bit more about you before we get into all of the fun details.
Yes. Yeah. Hi. I'm Jessica Merino. I'm a CFP professional and a chartered investment management analyst, and I'm the owner of Merino Wealth Management. We're a fee-only financial planning firm in downtown Chicago. I'm actually here in my office right now, and we empower our clients to reach their possibilities and in helping them to invest in equality. Within our firm, we actually have built up a bit of a niche where we work a lot with high-income earning women in their 30s and 40s who receive equity compensation. So I'm really excited to be talking today. On the personal side, I live right outside of Chicago, and I, with my husband and my 2-year-old, and we're actually in the very early phases of talking about planning my sabbatical a year from now. So I'm excited to talk a little bit about that, and and again, talk a little bit more about just all different flavors of sabbaticals, including Susie and Jan's and others that we've seen along the years too.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for joining. And if you are new to me, I am Susie Chow. I help people live abroad for a month or more, even with a job, house, pets, kids, and no time to plan. So I also want to give you a little bit more background about kind of where we were at. And today is a very, very special day because today is the 10-year anniversary of my husband and I departing on our around the world trip for a year. So I can hardly believe that it's been a whole decade, but I thought it would be so perfect to have Jessica on for this particular episode of the LinkedIn Live that I am doing because Jessica was a huge part of our whole decision making. I mean, you don't even know, Jess, but
I remember some of the conversations for sure. Yeah.
So I just want to give you a little bit of background. I mean, before we talked to Jessica and brought this up, we did some work budgeting, and we kind of like scoured at that time. It was all about the blogs, and there were a lot of blogs that we were reading and following that they had done something similar, but it's really hard to figure out a budget when you have a different travel style than the person that's writing and you don't really know them directly. But we came up with a random number. I think we came up with like 40,000 was our target number that we were going to talk to Jessica about. And that was a bit of as I mentioned, the blogs, and also we read Matt Napke's book, $50 a day. And so it was very like backpacker shoestring budget. And we knew we were like kind of like that, but maybe not super extreme. So it was a very long process, and I help my clients make that process way easier. I've got calculators and everything. So you can develop a budget way, way easier than this, that I've, really refined throughout the years, depending on where you're going and how long, et cetera. But we kind of had this number that we weren't quite so sure about. And also to give you more background on, just a financial picture of where we were at. We were both working corporate jobs. So before I did this as my job, I was in management consulting. My husband, he was working in a retail-based job doing e-commerce. So like we both had good jobs. We were very good savers. We were living in Chicago. we didn't have like crazy spending habits. We had no debt because we were renting an apartment, no kids at the time. So that kind of hopefully gives you a little bit of a picture on like where we were at when we broached this topic with Jessica, and we were nervous. We were like, oh, this is like so stupid because society would tell you like, no, you should work until you retire, right? Like that's what you do. And we were trying to do something totally different than that, and we weren't quite sure what that would look. And this was like 6 months after we had our wedding, so that was already like a huge budget. I mean, we were working with Jessica, so we had a financial plan for this, but this was a bit of a curveball. And we were just so relieved when we talked with you and you were like, okay, I think that some financial advisors would immediately hear this idea and be like, you sure about that? Because it isn't, the traditional path. But I mean, one of the reasons why we work with Jessica is just more of that philosophy on being able to use your money in ways to support your dreams, like before you retire and also in retirement, but like throughout your life. So I'd love to hear, Jessica, just a little bit about, what your perspective was, what was going through your head when we, sat down at your office together and we, threw this bomb on the table. What do you think?
Well, I think just my overall philosophy is that, when we're helping clients with their finances, we should really be doing the things that they want to do with their money, right? And then from there, my team and I will then give them the tools and make sure that they're educated and smart and efficient about how, they're moving forward with those strategies and ideas and achieving those goals. So the way I see it, right, like it shouldn't come down to what my priorities are for the client, right? It's their money and they work hard for it. So I think just kind of first and foremost, that's always top of mind when somebody comes to me. And actually we've kind of gotten to this point where when a prospective client reaches out to us, they fill out a little questionnaire. And one of our questions is like, what are your pipe dream goals or wild card goals and stuff? Because, part of how we see empowering people to reach their possibilities is, kind of thinking a little bit more outside of the box. And granted, that's not necessarily step one for everybody. And I think in the case of you and Jan, you already had a really good financial foundation. So that was key. And what I just find is just the better place you're in, just the more options you give yourself. And you're right. Like you guys were in your 30s, you had decades to go before retirement. Every dollar you made shouldn't have just been waiting till retirement, right? Like there are other things that you guys worked hard for that you should have been able to reap the benefits of and everything. And in fact, what I remember from those preliminary conversations too, is, I ran some different calculations and took a look at everything. And in your case too, right, we were talking about, this really big goal, right, of, not working for a year and traveling the world for an entire year. So certainly too, right, like we talked about the fact that there were potentially some trade-offs as well too, right? Like that wasn't going to be the year that you put a big down payment down on a house and attached yourself to a large mortgage, So there were things that we talked through. And if you remember, when I came back to you, my budget was a little bit higher of what I told the two of you could actually achieve. And I thought that the number you came up with, that 40,000, I was worried that maybe wouldn't be enough to be exactly realistic. When we looked at, number one, what you'd still be on the hook for back in Chicago. But then number two, when we thought about like actual travel expenses, living expenses, things like that. And then if you remember this too, I gave you like a stretch budget as well. So we gave like the target budget, like, hey, this is a sweet spot. This is the good number. But then I actually gave you like a stretch number that I actually think possibly made you and Jan a little uncomfortable to think about. I remember the conversation. And you didn't.
I think that we landed, I think at the end of the day, we ended up spending maybe like 48,000. So like above what we had initially thought. And I remember kind of before we left, we were like 50,000. Like, I don't know if your stretch budget was even higher than that, to be honest. This
Yeah,
was
50,000 was the target number that I had
okay.
given you, and the stretch budget was beyond that. Yeah.
Okay.
So
Okay.
kind of like I guess my head always goes to like worst case scenario, right? Like what if they start this thing and
Right.
we kind of quickly lose track of money, or things just cost
Yeah.
more, or there's a problem, or whatever the case may be. So I kind of gave you that stretch number, so that just trying to be realistic,
Mhm.
and also still wanted to make sure, of course, that you guys had some transition money too, because you had to get back into working, find a new apartment.
Mhm.
Wanted to make sure
Mhm.
you still had an emergency fund in place. Wanted to make sure purchasing a home was still an option, and retiring. So there are kind of all these boxes I wanted to make sure we checked off,
Yeah.
as best as possible, of course. Because also too, I think the one thing, and this is why my mind, I think, goes to that worst case scenario is, like they're just things that we can't project or predict, right? So I wanted to make sure that we were, in good shape, should things be a little bit different than what we were predicting and everything. And again, you guys came pretty much perfectly, under
Yeah.
budget there.
Wild how that worked. And it wasn't until after we returned back that we realized, oh, what we spent traveling to all 7 continents in a year was still less than like our normal expenses just living in Chicago, which kind of blew my mind that going to all 7 continents. I mean, and we did a lot of cost saving strategies from on the travel side of things, staying with friends and family quite a bit and using points and miles for our big long haul flights. So definitely we could have spent a lot more, but we did have some big ticket things in there, like going to Antarctica.
Okay, yeah.
Um, that was not a part of the original plan. The original plan was that we were going to do Asia, come home for Christmas, and the holidays, make our way to South America, and then maybe Europe. That was the original plan, but one thing led to another, and we ended up hitting all 7 continents. But I think that I just wanted to call out that it was less than living in Chicago, because at that point it's kind of a swap. Obviously, we were not working while we were traveling, but was also a very different time. Right now, you absolutely could work,
Yeah.
for if you wanted to do something like this. When you think about the cost, it really, and in many cases, you could definitely live for way less than if you're living in US, Canada, Europe, if you're watching from there, if you're living and doing slow travel, it's really a swap. And that's what I tell a lot of people if you are thinking about traveling, because I really specialize in helping people to travel for a month, because I know a year is like way extreme. And a lot of people, aren't, in the place that they would take that big of a leap. So I think that the month is that sweet spot to where it's longer than a vacation. It feels different. But also depending on how you travel, it's really could be a swap of your typical, let's say, vacation abroad for a week or two. If you go and you do more of a slow travel, which is what I specialize in, it's pretty apples to apples. If you're looking, destination for 1 or 2 weeks, spending nights in, expensive hotels versus, let's say, a monthly home rental that has a good discount. So it's just thinking a little bit out of the box about those expenses. And I just think that having that bigger picture of a year costing just what it costs to live in Chicago, like it just brings things into a completely different perspective on what you can do with your money.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, and if you think like in a big city like Chicago, if you're thinking about, just rent alone, if you're someone who's renting, I mean, that in itself, even just for a basic 1 bedroom apartment, can be significantly more. Plus, if you add on any sort of like parking and amenity fees and whatnot, I mean, it really adds up. And certainly some of the countries that you spent time in, if we're looking at like South America, I mean, 1 month of rent in Chicago could easily be 3 months, if you play your cards right. So I will say some of it comes down, I think, to location and priorities and what the needs are and everything. But I mean, that cost of living is I think the biggest piece that at times people can make a little more affordable. Also too, right, if you're somebody who maybe owns a home and you're thinking about selling your home, maybe time to have a break in between your mortgage.
Yeah.
Again, those housing expenses, if you've been paying for childcare and maybe your child's going to be going off to school, the public school, right? Like there may be expenses that naturally are going to be dropping off. So timing some of that can really be helpful when you're thinking about a sabbatical. Because the way I see it, like the less you're on the hook for, if it's longer term, then the easier it'll be to kind of stomach the expenses, or again, it could even be less expensive for you.
Right.
I will say when we're looking at a shorter trip, like a month or 6 weeks or 2 months, you may not want to overhaul your life, you might not want to sell the cars and everything. Because guess what? Like in 3 weeks, you're gonna have to worry about where you're gonna live again. Right. So, but I will say, when we're looking at something like a 1 month sabbatical, I think for most working professionals, working individuals who have discretionary income, I actually don't think that's too much of a stretch. So I think some of it just comes down to priorities, and you're right, depending on the location, it may be just like the spending of a normal vacation. It's just stretched out a little bit more. So I would actually make the argument that I think if you're somebody who has decent discretionary income and you're in a good financial position just overall, I don't think that planning for a month is too much of a stretch. And I think depending on your exact situation, and I'm obviously not giving any specific advice today or anything, but based on your exact situation, I think, that planning could easily financially be in, kind of the year to 2 year range. And again, without really infringing too much on your quality of life or other savings goals and priorities and everything. So, I think from a financial standpoint, it's probably not that much of a stretch, again, if the rest of your financial foundation's in pretty good shape.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that, because it's one thing to hear about me, but I'd love to hear some other scenarios and situations clients have that you've worked with that have either taken sabbaticals or done some things in a similar way. I'd just love to hear some stories about that, just to give some more context that maybe some people watching, maybe they don't identify with me and in our situation, but might be able to identify with some other stories from your clients.
Yes. Yeah. So actually, when I was thinking about what our conversation was going to be like today, actually one client came to mind where I want to say it was maybe 2 years ago, we were reviewing her financial plan. She'd been a client for several years, and we had gotten to the point where her family's net worth had topped $1 million. And she actually started like crying and tearing up. And she said, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe that I've come this far. I think back to like 10 years ago, I was in an abusive relationship. I was barely scraping by, which my life was just so different. I never thought I would get to a point where I'd feel comfortable like this financially." And so I'm probably going to tear up thinking about it. So in that moment, I was like, oh my gosh, this is such a wonderful conversation to be having with her. Like I knew that she was in good shape and she'd done a good job working really hard over the years and had been compensated well. And was, just this really wonderful person. But I think for her to see it in black and white was just like so empowering. So then, we fast forward a few months and she'd been working at a large tech company, and it was a really, really demanding job, and just had kind of gotten to this point where, there was just like a, pretty extreme burnout. And at that time she wound up choosing another job, and actually had kind of walked away from some total compensation, thinking this other job was going to have less of that burnout factor. Didn't happen. So it actually was still, really demanding position. And so finally kind of got to this point where we started talking about, well, what if you wanted to take a break? Again, you're in a good position, that, had kind of checked off all the, boxes for, progress on other goals. One of the big things we did was we took inventory too of like income sources. So she has a spouse. We talked about that. We also looked at their overall spending and really, kind of made the determination that they would be okay for a while on one income. We also took a look at some of the extras they were doing as well too, from a financial standpoint, like trying to pay down their mortgage early, really aggressive monthly savings, building up a nest egg that wasn't really earmarked towards anything, things like that. And so then from there, she actually did wind up putting in notice for her position, and at this point now has been off for a little bit over a year. I think we're going on like a year and a half at this point. And granted, we had the conversation of, without some big lifestyle changes, this can't be forever. You're not, retiring at, I can't remember exactly what age she was, like 41 or 42 or something. But at the same time too, sometimes taking that time, taking that break can really be what you need to then make those next moves and everything. And so I know this particular client's kind of looked at other positions, considered maybe doing some consulting work, or maybe going and starting their own business and everything. And again, when you have a really demanding job and you're busy, personally, professionally, it's just hard to even have the brain space to think about that, just physically, emotionally, mentally, and everything. And so it's really great to kind of sit down and have those conversations and say, okay, yes, we might not be able to work super aggressively towards some financial goals during this time. We kind of put some things on pause, let's say, again, like paying down the mortgage early. But at the end of the day, right, this isn't necessarily going to derail everything. And we've already checked off a lot of financial boxes as well, too, right? So at a certain point, if you're really unhappy, and again, it's taking a toll on you and your family and physically and everything, more money doesn't really solve those problems. So, so I will say that's, just kind of one client that came to mind. I also too, we're seeing a lot as well that there are, a lot of companies going through big layoffs right now. So I've actually had a number of conversations with clients this summer where, again, we've had that conversation of, hey, you can take a little bit of time here. You don't have to, luckily you don't have to jump in and take the first crummy job. You can take some time. And again, we do the math on things like what monthly expenses look like. Again, if there's other income sources in the household. In the case of somebody who's been laid off, we have a lot of clients that have received severance packages. And at least in the state of Illinois, if you're not earning income, if the severance comes, but you're not earning it, you're not actually doing work for the company, you can qualify for unemployment as well too. So in some cases, our clients have been let go, and for a period of time, they may actually have a little bit more in terms of their cash flow that then we can stretch out for a while. And granted, some of them have and may land a job right away, and that might be what they want to do, but others, may take a break or again, use some time to travel. So I would say too, especially if you're someone who's thinking about a shorter term hiatus or sabbatical, again, whether that's a month or 2 months, at times taking advantage of the situation can be a great way to really just leverage what's at your disposal and everything, right? So in theory, one of my clients, if they land a job and the start date's not till October 1st, or they can negotiate a later start date, right? And we know there's a certain amount of income that they already have, a certain amount in savings and stuff, that could be the perfect opportunity to go, maybe take some trips or visit or whatnot. Or in the case of some of our clients, they've kind of scattered out a few different trips. So sometimes even just between jobs, when you have that next job lined up and you have the last day on the last job, in many cases, that can be the perfect time to just give yourself a little bit of a break before you jump into that next job, which and ideally you want to show up and be giving that 110%.
Yeah. And I think that that was the situation that, so the reason that drove my husband and I to take our year off was because he was at a company that was acquired by a larger company. So essentially he was laid off because they closed the Chicago office. And so we used that career transition timeframe as, I saw it, making lemonade out of lemons, right? Now you don't have to go taking a year. I know that that's a bit extreme, but yeah, taking a month, I think that taking that as an opportunity when you truly have zero work, you do not have to worry about any emails coming in or any work, like that is just such a beautiful time. And it also, I think, really helps when you work with a financial advisor who is like essentially giving you permission. Like for us, it was the comfort of knowing that we've got it covered. That helped us feel comfortable making those moves. Maybe we would have done it anyway, but we definitely felt a lot like we were being responsible adults, right? Not doing something crazy. But yeah, if you can, for most of the interview process at this point these days, it's mostly virtual, so you can look for a new job in a different place. Just something to consider to plant those seeds, so to speak. And the other thing I wanted to mention too is if you are taking, let's say, a sabbatical, there are some financial benefits to taking a sabbatical, not earning income. I mean, we were kind of surprised when we came back. We like made a bunch of money on the investments that were already in place, plus taxes, because we had a very low income. So we had some tax benefits there, and you could even, and you probably know a bit more about this, like take advantage of that low income when you sell stocks, so like lower those capital gains taxes. And, I think that there's a lot of things that you could, if you know that this is a finite time, you could take advantage of some of those aspects when you are at a lower income point than your normal income.
Oh, absolutely. And I would say that definitely applies more so when it's unpaid time off or lower paid time off, partially paid. But yes, absolutely. So there may be, some accounts that you don't qualify to put money into based on where your income's at and your tax bracket is at. But if it's a lower income earning year, sometimes that's enough to tip the scales and let you qualify. So those are the types of things we like to take advantage of. And specifically, some of those accounts include like the Roth IRA is a big one, or an IRA, and you have until the tax deadline to fund them. So again, if 2023 is the year where you're earning a little less income, maybe 2 months of unpaid time, and that's enough to put you in that lower tax bracket, you have until next April to put that money in. So we've actually been able to work with clients at times with just the timing of everything. So if we know, okay, we're going to not have income for a couple months, but then we'll get back to our norm, then again, we can play a little bit of catch up and everything. So certainly too, yes, if you have any appreciated assets, a low income earning year can be a really great year to move forward with selling any of those assets, or maybe selling a little more aggressively. Also too, if you're withdrawing, so if you're somebody who's maybe retired and you're withdrawing from those retirement accounts, again, sometimes lower income earning year, again, if maybe you're timing this with when you retire, or again, taking a break and then easing into your retirement, that could be a good year to be a little more aggressive with the withdrawals, or even move forward with like conversions or things like that. So sometimes just kind of the timing of the money can actually be a really great benefit when there's a bit of a like income pause.
Awesome. I mean, I hope everybody listening just got some ideas like, hey, this could actually be an advantage financially, not just personally, because I think that that's so far outside. I mean, it's obviously outside the realm of normal financial planning, right? But just knowing, even if you didn't understand everything that Jessica said,
just know there could be some
benefits. Just knowing that there are, potential ways to make this, lower income season, however long that is, to your advantage. I think that just that knowledge that there are options out there, I think is so helpful to seeing this as an opportunity and taking some time, to travel, explore the world, what I help clients do, seeing that as not just costs, and outright costs. There's creative ways we can make this work to really help potentially your overall financial situation. So thank you for sharing that. Real quick, I wanted to just touch on, while we were traveling, what was really helpful working with you was that we were able to set up like paychecks while we were on the road, which was so nice.
I always do that with quotes. Paychecks is what I call it.
Yeah. From our own money. Thank you, Dan and Susie. But we got paychecks just so we didn't have like $50,000 in our bank account. So if, like, let's say our ATM card got stolen and, people were cashing in, whatever, random situations, or I shouldn't say clearly, but nothing bad like that happened. But it was good to just have, a constant cash flow coming in, and that also kind of controlled our budgets too. And when we did need it, larger sums of money, for example, our Antarctica trip, that was a very extreme expense that was outside of the normal, on average, what we were spending every couple weeks. Jessica was able to help us with that. So that was really helpful. Also, a couple last things before we left, we did make sure that we had a living will, and power of attorney, again, just in case anything strange would happen. And, we would be able to have somebody like physically go into a bank in the US if there were anything, bad happening. For, it's always good to have. It's kind of like insurance. It's like one of those things you just got to do and you hope you never have to use it, but it's good to have just from a comfort standpoint. So I just wanted to call that out as something. If you are considering doing something like this, those are a couple other financial boxes you may want to tick to make sure you're covered. So anything else, Jess, that you wanted to mention before we kind of wrap things up?
I think just kind of to piggyback on what you mentioned with the paychecks, I think when it comes to something like a sabbatical, career break, long-term travel, kind of any of the above, the way I see it is that there's like a few calculations that you want to consider, and sometimes people can do this on their own. Sometimes they need a professional to help. But basically, it's just, okay, what does it cost for just our normal life, right? Like, so whether it's for the next year or 1 month, right? Like, what will be those expenses that stay? So there's that calculation. Then you'll want to think about like, okay, so what else is there above and beyond that? So for example, in the case of my sabbatical, we're not selling our house. We're going to be gone for a month. There'll be additional out-of-pocket expenses, but we're still going to be paying the mortgage and, utilities, things like that. So then you'll want to consider that. And then you'll want to look at what those income sources are as well too, right? Well, in the case of my husband and I actually have a fully paid sabbatical program that I set up through my company a handful of years ago. So I'll still get full pay, during that time period. My husband works remotely. So, you'll want to consider those income sources. And then from there, it's just kind of doing the math then on what's the gap. And then, right, the gap can be funded either depending on how the expenses need to be paid, right? Some of that might need to be in a lump sum. And then some of it may need to be spread out over time, especially for a longer trip and everything. So depending on, what that number looks like, in some cases, again, it could be less than what you're actually spending right now, or again, it could be a little more. But when you have that discretionary income, again, I think it's just kind of that trade-off of maybe redirecting some of what you're already spending money on towards this if it's a priority. And again, in some cases, the gap might not be actually that big.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, if you have any questions on anything that we talked about, whether you're live or catching the replay, pop them down in the comments below, depending on where you're watching, and we'll get you some answers. But I'd love to just wrap things up. Jessica, if people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Yeah, absolutely. You can go to our website, which is merinowealth.com, MERINOWEALTH.com. There's a lot of info there. And then if you wanted to talk about your situation, we do offer a complimentary consultation. So yeah, feel free to reach out. Again, we really love these out of the box goals, and granted, the traditional goals are a lot of fun too. Don't get me wrong. And we focus on the ins and outs of our clients' finances. So we want to make sure it's all covered. But it's always kind of fun when we can get a little creative with the things we're doing. So as much as you and Jen felt like you were kind of crazy walking into my office, or I think you emailed me in advance of the meeting so I could be prepared. Again, when we can get creative like this with what we're doing, it can be a lot of fun for my team and I.
Yeah. Awesome. And if you want to get in touch with me, I would love to talk about your dreams of traveling for a month or more. You can DM me if you're watching here on LinkedIn or Facebook. Just shoot me a DM. Let me know that you caught this episode and would love to hear your thoughts about that. And we can talk about your dreams. I'm also on Instagram at Carpe Diem Traveler, 1L. And I would love to talk with you. I also have some free, I'm currently offering free 30-minute roadmap calls, which is really to identify exactly how and when you can live abroad for a month in the next 12 months. So I would love to get you set up with one of those calls if that sounds like something you're interested in. So thank you so much for joining. Jessica, this was a fantastic conversation. I hope everybody watching learned a little something new and inspired. Sorry, what did you say?
I said happy 10-year anniversary.
Oh, yes, I know. I almost forgot. It's kind of wild that it's been 10 years, but I hope that people watching really learned a thing or two and are inspired to think a little bit differently about how they can use a sabbatical maybe to their advantage. And yes, well, thank you so much for watching. If you are interested in sabbaticals, next week I will be talking to the literal author on career breaks. She's writing her name is Katrina McGee. She's writing a Career Breaks for Dummies, that For Dummies brand, those brand of books. She's writing that. So you can tune in next week to learn all about career breaks. So I hope you join me for that. But thanks so much for watching. Have a good one.